Welcome to My Therapist is Out. Each episode, we talk with a therapist from Open Space Therapy Collective or LGBT community members about mental health and building community. I'm your host, Renae Johnson, licensed therapist and founder of Open Space Therapy Collective, where we are your hub for queer and trans mental health care.
As we dive into today's topic, please keep in mind that this is a mental health podcast. We will talk about sensitive and difficult issues that are not appropriate for all audiences. Please take care while listening.
Welcome back to My Therapist is Out. I am so excited to have a very special guest with us today, Naima Merella. They are a massage therapist, a yoga teacher, an herbalist, an artist, and all-around Renaissance magician. And so I'm really excited to dive in and talk to you a little bit more about what you do and how you do it. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Renae.
To start us off, for people who don't know you, can you talk a little bit more about what you do?
So I'm a massage therapist. I mainly work in like deep tissue, Swedish, trigger point release, myofascial therapy are the modalities that I do. I also am trained in Reiki, so sometimes I'll incorporate that into massages as well. And I'm also a yoga teacher. I like to teach classes that are pretty accessible and more focused on people connecting with their bodies and like releasing tension, slowing down, and kind of being in a more meditative space. And with herbalism, I have a kind of herbal medicine line where I make herbal teas. A lot of them are helpful for like emotional support. Some of them are also good for physical support. I'm also a part of a community garden where I grow some herbs and have done some herbal workshops there to help people understand how they can use herbs to support their health, as well as just kind of like creating a community space for people to be in a green space in a city. And yeah, but I'm also an artist. I don't know if you'll see this, but there's most of my paintings behind me.
I was wondering if those were yours.
Yeah. So right now I've mainly been doing acrylic paintings. I've been working on a series called the Gender Expansive Ancestors series, which is a portrait series of historical people who were trans or kind of like challenged how we now think of the gender binary. So yeah, those are the main things I've been doing lately. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love how, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, how you have all of these different specialties and how you have found ways to weave them together, because they're not like specific, I do this and then totally separately, then I'm a yoga teacher, and then totally separately I'm a herbalist, and totally separately I'm a massage therapist, and you've done a really beautiful job in what you do and weaving it all together, which I think is really, really important and really speaks to how healing creativity is and intuition is, and how to like bring that into your work and in your everyday life. And it's something, as I'm getting to know you, that I just continually am admiring of you. And to like give you some props, Naima was at our Queerly Connected event in the fall, and my household has a bottle of your like sleep tincture, herbal tincture, and
Cool.
It's almost empty. We are obsessed with it. It is helping us slumber well.
I love that.
Yeah. I'm a little stumped on where to start because there are so many things. How did you get connected to your creative side and your healing side?
So I guess like all of the things that I do were first things that like supported myself before I like then expanded them to be things that are supporting other people. But art was kind of like my first love, and I grew up in a like creative household. Both my parents are musicians, and so there's just like a lot of support around like being a creative person. And so um, I like ended up going to art school for college. And so yeah, art has just always been like a big part of my life. And I think through going to art school, I learned that that wasn't something that I wanted to do for a job, but it was more just something that I did as a healing practice for myself. But also kind of like in art school, my I was not paying much attention to my body, and it was like really taking a beating. I was like feeling a lot of pain. And so then I started getting into yoga, and I was like, oh wow, this is really helpful for my body. That also like helped me like deepen my connection with my body. I think I was like pretty like dissociated from my body for a while. So it really was a practice that like helped to empower me in a lot of ways, and just to like help me feel more like grounded and centered and like present. And then kind of like through yoga, I got into massage where I ended up becoming a yoga teacher, and then I was doing a like massage and yoga trade with my first massage therapist, and that was like my first time getting massage, and I was like, oh wow, like yoga's like helped me connect with my body, but getting massage also helps me understand how the whole body is connected in a more like tangible way. I started off doing like I did like a Thai massage training, and then like kind of years down the line I ended up going to massage therapy school, and then kind of in the middle of that I think well I've always been a person who like loves nature, but a friend of mine was like in an herbalism class and would always like give me little like be like, oh, take this for this, and then I was like, this is really cool, maybe I should take this class. And I ended up doing this like 8 month herbalism training that taught us how to grow herbs and then also how they affect the body systems. Kind of like doing all these things. And I think also just like being a creative person and also maybe being a neurodivergent person, I was like able to see like the connections between all these things. And I think just also knowing that like healing happens in so many different ways, I found that like all of these modalities really supported my own healing in different ways. I'm also a person that like loves to learn and loves to teach. And so I think through learning these things, I always felt like I wanted to share them with other people and, you know, with the hope that they would support them in a similar way. So,
Cool.
yeah.
It sounds like you're summing it up very beautifully, and it sounds like it's been a really big journey and that you've had to really be in tune with yourself through this process. Like even being able to be like, I am an artist, but I don't want to have a career or traditional career attached to that. I'm noticing I'm neglecting my body and getting into moving it, and then being in community with your massage therapist. And like it's a really insightful thing to be able to continue to link into yourself and into the people around you and the environment around you to start sewing all of these things together. That's really impressive.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. I think also like within that journey is also like um, kind of coming up against like systems of oppression and like seeing how those things uh, sort of like part of why I was like, oh, I don't want to do art as a career was because of like experiencing like white supremacy in school as like especially as like a black person and um, you know, and also like sexism and kind of feeling like there was like blocks in the way that kind of I had like dreams of what I wanted, but then coming up against these real obstacles made me see things in a different way where I was like, oh, if I go after these things that I want, it also means being involved in a world that like may be actually pretty traumatic for me. Um, and so yeah, I think there's been like kind of just trying to carve out my own path of like how can I exist in the world in a way that is actually supportive for me and like doesn't put me in harm's way as much as possible. Um, so yeah, and I've also done some like trauma informed trainings, and that's been a really powerful thing for me to learn more about like how trauma affects our physical bodies and minds. And I really weave that into all of the modalities that I practice as well.
Yeah, that's really important. And like the art world notoriously is like deeply racist and classist and just toxic. And it's also a hard thing to let go of your dreams of what it is and step back and be like, okay, what I need and what I want for myself is not this trauma, but to have a more supportive space. As you've transitioned into creativity for yourself and the healing arts, how has identity and all of your intersectional identities been able to be engaged for yourself, but also the clients and community that are drawn to you?
Hmm. Yeah, I think just because of my identities as like a person of color, a queer person, like trans non-binary person, um, a neurodivergent person, like I think a lot about identity and how that affects like our body minds, and just wanting to like I think it's really important for me to provide accessible spaces. And I think especially based on like what identities we hold, and especially when we hold oppressed identities, there's a way that like disconnects us from our bodies, um, can like make our is hard for our mental health. And so um, like with my like I just want to provide space that can be as accessible as possible to like help people to just like heal their bodies and minds and be able to connect with their bodies more deeply. um, I definitely believe in the like kind of like the body keeps the score kind of thing, even though I haven't read that book. But like um, just in that like our bodies really do hold all of our experiences, and there's a lot that gets put onto our bodies, especially when we hold like oppressed identities. So being able to like unpack all of that and like kind of like understand like what are those things that have been put onto you, and then like letting those go, kind of like peeling the onion of that, and really connecting with like who you are beneath that is really important to me. But yeah, I think what that looks like in a more like tangible way is like, as like a massage therapist, like I'm working to make sure that I'm training and understanding like how to massage like fat folks and like create a space that's accessible for them, whether that's like having a wider table or providing like certain physical supports, like bolstering their bodies in different ways that can help them feel comfortable and not feel like they just have to like just try to be small. And I think that feeling of like needing to be small is something that a lot of different oppressed peoples feel. And so I think part of my like body healing work is like just like giving people space to take up space, and to also like know that they have agency over their own bodies. Um, so I always try to create a space where I'm like reminding people that like even though I'm like guiding this thing, like you're really in charge. Yeah, I think when it comes to like queer folks, I'm like thinking about like I just did a training for like support for top surgery and binding, and so like being able to like give people massage that can support them in that way feels important. And I think even just being like a Black queer person, like people come to me because they want to have like a therapist who holds those identities, and I definitely like understand wanting to have that, especially in a world where like there's not a lot of access always to therapists that hold those identities. And I think there's like just kind of like a mutual understanding that happens sometimes when you hold similar identities. where it's just like, you get it, you know, like kind of what this person's probably experienced and yeah, what they may be carrying coming into the room that they're like trying to release and just how to like hold space for that in a way that's supportive for the person. And yeah, I think just really making space for people to be human.
Yeah. I am struck by how easily you just said a bunch of really difficult things. um, it's, I mean, just alonely, like, I make space for people to take up space. Never happens. Like, that is such a rare thing. Being mindful and getting a bigger table so people of different body sizes can feel comfortable regardless. And that's not a thing that is something that will be haunting the entire massage experience. Being able to provide care for like pre and post like gender affirming surgeries is a deep skill and very complicated. And then having, you know, queer, BIPOC, trans, trauma-informed care all into your healing practices, not just as like, I took a bunch of trainings and now I know some things, but just fully embodied as yourself and on top of the education and application that you do to it is really rare. And it's very infrequent that we see and experience practitioners who are able to hold skillfully those multitudes.
Yeah, I think that's something that I think I've been really fortunate in a lot of my learning spaces where they were pretty like inclusive and trauma informed. But ironically, when I went to massage therapy school, it was very much not that way. That was something that really stood out to me as like, well, for one, it was like kind of traumatic for me to go through that experience, but also I was like, oh, this is like really needed because if this is like the baseline of the learning, that means that so many massage therapists don't like fully understand consent or don't understand trauma or yeah, just you know, pretty much like all the effects of like systems of oppressions and like how that affects someone's physical body and um, you know how that there's like a power dynamic when you're like a therapist working with a client and just kind of like the importance of like leveling that as much as you can. So yeah, I think that was like an eye-opening experience for me in realizing that a lot of the skills that I already have are really necessary in this field and um, just that there is a really big need for practitioners who you know hold marginalized identities and also who understand like trauma informed care and can really just create like a safe space for people to heal.
Can you, whatever you're comfortable with, share more about what massage therapy training in school is like? I understand the problems in therapy education, but the massage school piece of it, I don't know very much about, so I'd be really curious because I know for me, I'm a huge fan of massage. I love it. It is bodywork things have like saved my life, and I've gone to massage therapists who are fantastic and wonderful, and then I've gone to other ones who I feel worse and horrible and gross and just a lot of pain and like deep ick. And there's not having the understanding or experience of what the education is like. I'd be curious from you, what was really difficult about it and where were the flaws and where do you see opportunities for it to change?
Well, you know, I think also I'm like I'm sure every massage school is different and I only went to one, so that's all I know. But but in general, like well, at that school, I felt like it was very like capitalist minded. And I think that I'm sure that is how a lot of spaces are because we live in a capitalist society and that's like that influences like everything. But it was definitely like kind of like let's just like get as many people in as we can and kind of like cycle through these cohorts as quickly as possible so that like we can make as much money as possible, which like that creates an environment that's like not very supportive for learning, that doesn't like slow down to like take steps to like create more of a safe space for people. So like I guess to just kind of like map out what like a day in the massage school looked like was like we would like lecture in the morning and then have like hands-on training in the evening where we'd like pair up together and trade massaging each other. But within that, there wasn't really any talk about like consent. There wasn't really like room for us to like connect with each other to kind of feel out like, okay, who do we feel comfortable getting massaged by? And it's kind of like this expectation of like, well, you're in the training, you should feel comfortable with anyone touching you. And as someone who has trauma in my background, like I don't feel comfortable with anyone
No
touching
way.
me.
No way. Oh my God.
Yeah. And so like for me, that was like a really big obstacle to learning. And yeah, even when I've been in some other massage learning spaces, I've had that similar experience where they're just like, okay, we're all here doing the thing, let's go. And for me, that's like really hard to just be like, oh wait, I actually need some time to suss out like who I feel comfortable touching my body. Um, so yeah, and then I think like not creating a baseline of that for people means that when they like go out into the field and then are practicing as a massage therapist, like they're probably also entering into that with the same expectation of like, well, this person should just feel comfortable with me touching their body because that's what they signed up for, which like I think is problematic and yeah, just doesn't acknowledge the complexity of like being in a body and everything that goes along with that. So yeah, I think also like there wasn't a lot of support for like if you needed to learn in a different way, like the classroom was like 30 people and you know sometimes that also meant like a lot of people talking in the background and like you know they tried to like diminish that as much as possible but like I think inherently like having these really big groups of people just doesn't create the best environment when you're learning something especially that's so hands-on and so intimate. um, so yeah, I mean I think that it's the school that I went to just had kind of like all of the like the ways that like systems of oppression like impact a lot of like institutional spaces like that was just like very apparent in the school and they didn't really you know implement it was like on the surface they said that they were like you know queer friendly and they had like you know us share pronouns on the first day but then it was like past that instructors would still be misgendering people and you know things like that where it's just like on the surface you're saying you support everyone but when it comes down to what's actually happening that's not really the case and we're falling into like all the tropes that we already know are bad but yeah so
Yeah.
yeah
And I'm sure you do too, but a conversation that's happening in our team at Open Spaces is how to recognize other providers that are quote unquote queer informed, but past the first 3 steps just default into the colonized privileged spaces and don't worry really about gendering or dead naming because oh oops I'm trying or like you know in our world it can be a lot of I'm just going to jump in and talk frivolously about your trauma like it's super easy even though I haven't like asked for consent if that is something that I can
Mm,
talk about, or you want feedback on, or is this okay? Like there's this, like you're saying, like, oh, you're all here, so you all should be fine touching each other and having people touch you. It's like, just because you show up to a space doesn't mean it's a green light for everything to happen in that space. And I think
mhm,
I'm glad you're pointing it out, because I think this is a thing that really gets missed.
definitely. Yeah, just like I feel like well, not I feel, there are steps that we can take to, in the beginning of like sharing space in any kind of capacity, just make sure that everyone feels like safe and supported. Um, and in a lot of spaces I've been in the past, that's like creating community agreements. And, I think even doing things like that and just like naming the real like barriers that might come up or challenges that might come up before you start something is really important, to also be like, okay, how can we work to like navigate that it with as much care as possible, as opposed to it just being like, all right, we're just going to jump in and just see what happens. And yeah, again, it's like not acknowledging that like we're all humans with experiences and trauma and so many things coming into the room whenever we share space together. So I think acknowledging that feels really important to me.
Yeah. What's an example for people who this is kind of a new concept to? Um, do you have, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, do you have an example or an experience that you can think of, whether it's something you facilitated or something you were a part of, where community agreements was in the conversation, and what did that conversation look like, and what were the ongoing effects of that?
Well, yeah, actually, I guess one thing that I will name with community agreements is so I also work with this nonprofit called Gender Justice LA. Before I started working with them, they had a like what do they call it, like a wellness um, cohort, where essentially they invited a bunch of like queer, trans people who work in wellness or as healers in different capacities to come together for a weekend, and they created programming for us to connect with each other and just talk about like what our experiences and like what the queer community needs. And so at the start of that, they created a community agreement, or we all created community agreements together. Yeah, that felt like a nice space for us all to kind of like connect and see like what feels important to us as a group. One thing that I thought was like really sweet that got named was like this concept of first last and last first. So kind of understanding where your privilege lies and kind of like when you should step up or step back based on that. And like one way that that got implemented was like when we like broke for lunch, someone was like, hey, in accordance with this first last last first, if there are disabled people in the room, how about we let them go get lunch first, and that way they have easier access. And yeah, that was just something that I hadn't really done in a community space before, that I thought was like really beautiful and just like a great way to provide care and kind of like acknowledge people's differences and abilities, and like how that affects something as simple as going to get your lunch. And then at the end of that day, there was a disabled person who was like just so appreciative of that, and they were just like, wow, I've never been in a space where someone like really advocated for me in that way, and that was like really special. So yeah, that's an example of like how that can just create a more supportive space for people.
I love that. It's really, it's your description of this is sending me back to different um, times where I've been in these conversations. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about it is you get so many different perspectives and different viewpoints of how people are stepping into the room, that that we would never know because we only have our lived experience and like some understanding of people we've come into contact. But with these bigger groups, there's so many people stepping into the room with so many different perspectives and experiences. And it's a great way to start the conversation and to create the environment where it's really everybody coming in together and hearing each other and adjusting and understanding, so the space can really be communal instead of going in with the assumption of like, oh, everybody's got the similar attitude or purpose or agenda or motivation or whatever that I do. And then going about the meeting, the event, the organization, and then people are so disparate in their experience and the way that they're engaging and what it turns out to mean. And everybody's kind of oblivious to the other people's experiences.
Definitely. I definitely think a lot about like relational healing, and I think that there's like healing that we can do by ourselves, but like a lot of our healing actually happens in relationships. And as individuals, like we only know our own experience, and that's always going to be limited in a way. So in creating space for community and understanding other people's experiences, that can really like open up our perspective in a really beautiful way that can just help us like be more compassionate and more aware of like what other people go through, especially because we live in a society that intentionally silences oppressed voices and experiences. So yeah, it's like just so common that you're not going to understand those experiences as well. I mainly work out of Everybody Gym in Los Angeles. Um, so I teach yoga there twice a week, and I also do massage therapy there. So you can find info about me on their website. You can also check out my website, which is just my name, naimamerella.com. You can check me out on Instagram, which is at Naima_Merella. So yeah, those are the main ways you can connect with me. I also have like a specific Instagram for my herbal stuff and for massage, but all of them are under my main one.
Cool.
So
great.
yeah.
And we'll have all of those linked in the podcast description. And we'll definitely have you back because there's about 45 more things that I want to talk to you about. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It was a really moving conversation. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. And now, as we are ending for 2025, here is your queer moment of joy.
My name is Sebastian. My pronouns are he, him. And my moment of queer joy would be this summer. I had the opportunity to volunteer and be on the advisory board with DTLA Proud. It is a really wonderful organization. It is a grassroots community-sponsored pride in downtown LA. So it was just really wonderful to see all of the work that we did come to fruition in August, and I had a great time.
Thanks for joining us. If you're in California and looking for a therapist, visit our website at openspacetherapycollective.com and book a free intro call with one of our therapists. If you're enjoying My Therapist Is Out, please rate, review, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Do you know somebody who could use a little extra dose of queer community? Send them one of your favorite episodes of My Therapist Is Out and help our collective grow one listen at a time. My Therapist Is Out is an open space therapy collective podcast, and our podcast editing is done by Rachel Peltzer and Smash and Grab Studio. We'd love to hear from you about today's topic, so email us at info@openspacetherapycollective.com. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Open Space Therapy Collective. Thanks for listening.